Welcome back to the Nasselman Hockey Podcast. I always sit here right before. You notice I get a little quiet. And I'm trying to think of how to start the show. And I don't have anything like witty to say. We're recording in the morning, which we've done a couple times before, but it's just not our normal thing. So instead of like a beer or whatever, we're both drinking coffee quite early in the morning. We have our mugs. We'll try to avoid the slurping. Oh, he's just gonna go for it. We'll try to avoid it right into the microphone. We'll try to mute ourselves to make sure. But some news. Finally, and good news. Nothing bad. People have found some things to say about it, of course. But Mathew Barzal locked up until age 34, including this season. 9 more years of Mathew Barzal. What do you think of the deal? We did speak about it on our YouTube channel, so you can check out that the new NHP Shorts series that we're going to try to do this season. But we can dive into it a little bit more here. What did you think of the deal?
Yeah, so right away, I saw the number, and my first takeaway from that was less than I thought it was going to be. Right, a lot of people had him pegged for 9.5. Is it going to be 10? I didn't think it was, but the 9.15 number I thought was pretty fair for Matthew Barzell. Now I will say this: he does need to now start playing up to that contract because last season obviously wasn't the season for him to earn a quote unquote raise, but he has shown in the past that he could be, the dynamic McKinnon like player that we know he can be. So this is the season too that I've spoken to a couple people around the league, and I've heard this is going to be the year, contract year or not, that Barzell kicks it up to that level. And I look at Nathan McKinnon's history, and he earned that 6-year contract with the Colorado Avalanche, where I think he only had a $6 million AAV. This was before he signed, the biggest deal
It
in
was a
NHL
lot like
history
the
so far.
Tavares deal.
Yeah, yeah. So he signed the bridge, and then he took off, right? And of course that was to maybe earn a bigger contract, which he eventually did. But you do see in this league players who maybe take a little bit more time to take off the way they did, and that's what happened with Nathan McKinnon. So
Well, and they bet on themselves, and
and they
that's
bet on
that's
themselves, right?
definitely something. And it may be a mutual bet, right? They on both sides. They're both saying, um, we're willing to do this, and the players also have the same mind. If the contract gets done, you'd imagine that's the case, right? It's not anything crazy to kind of get to that point. But if the player wants to bet on themselves, they think they can be healthy, and the team thinks the same, and they can grow, and then they just kind of want to see where things are at, especially when you have somebody. So Barzell signed that deal 2 years ago. He's 23, right? And he had shown he's Calder Trophy winner. 85 points, 82 games in his first season, 17, 18, if I'm not mistaken, or something along those lines. Um, he's obviously capable of that. I think with the trot system and different things, maybe his point production wasn't where he wanted it to be. Certainly not where the team kind of hoped that it would be, despite the system. But I think that leads us to an interesting question, and something we talked about in the short. Yeah, and maybe more of my point is it about his production, like his point production specifically, and that is how we're tying that number to see like, oh, maybe he didn't deserve it, or is it the value he has to the team? Because if you're going to compare it to Braden Point, who I think makes around also $9 million, or maybe just above, maybe nine and a half,
He's the first contract comparable at 9.5.
so nine and a half, and I wouldn't base it. Obviously, Braden Point's broken 100 points in the last couple of full seasons, or whatever the case is. He's kind of played out of his mind, and obviously made it more than worth the Lightning's while winning back-to-back Stanley Cups and kind of being a huge part of that. But I wouldn't. The comparable can't start with the points themselves when you're doing that, especially with the way that the Islander system is. What I would suggest that we do is the value that these players have to the team. I would argue that Braden Point's value to the team is very similar to Barzal's value to the team, and kind of leave it there. The team
Yeah,
goes as Barzal goes. The team goes as Point goes, although he does have a better supporting cast. But you could argue the same about Barzal. That if the
it's a
players
matter of
around him are playing better this season, you'll see the point production go up, right? If he gets a little more
right.
confidence and the team's really gelling, he's playing with the same lines, the same line mates. Yeah, I mean that point total can go up for sure.
It's also a matter of just looking at his literal role, right? You say his role on the team, like as a leader and everything, but also his literal role as the number one center, because that's what Matthew Barzal is. He's the number one center, and like you said, maybe he's not producing on the score sheet in the same way, but he is the Islanders' number one center. I don't know how they're going to deploy the lines this year. I have seen Brock Nelson playing on the first line,
Well,
but
we're gonna
he's
talk about that a little bit later.
we
I did
will,
want to go over some of like the line juggling and
yeah,
and really just the fact that there aren't too many options, but we'll get there.
right, yeah, but pure talent wise, Matthew Barzal is the best center on this team. You could say Brock Nelson is the best scorer, whatever. Matthew Barzal is the best center on this team, and you want to keep him because, again, obviously the system played into how he found the score sheet. We don't really know what that's going to look like moving forward yet because preseason hasn't. We haven't seen the whole roster. They didn't work on special teams until like after the third preseason game, so we don't know yet what the system's going to look like. However, it's very easy to see with the eye test that Matthew Barzal has all of those tools that Nathan McKinnon has. He has all the tools that listen, I'm gonna say it. Connor McDavid has those tools. Are they as good? Maybe not, but he has them, right? So you're looking at a player who you're paying for the you hope that he gets to that level.
I think it's both. We're probably meeting somewhere in the middle. I think to start, granted, he hasn't been at that 80 plus point level, really like that 60 plus point level. I think he's gone it in the 60s at
Yeah.
least once for the last few seasons. Um, you're not necessarily talking about the point total yet. Again, that's where the value to the team is. And think about it. If he got a raise of $2.15 million. I give that raise to Barzell, right? That's pretty low raise for a player of that caliber with the ceiling that he has. And frankly, as much as look at Barry Trotz, look at a bunch of other coaches that have won cups and then were let go. Like Lane Lambert will not be his last coach. Lou Lamoriello will not be his last general manager. A lot of the players on this team by the end of this contract, or even in 4 seasons from now, 5 seasons from now, 3 seasons from now, who even knows, will be different, right? So the his upside really depends on the evolution of the franchise during the length of that contract. We cannot yet judge does he deserve it outside of the val again, and that's why I kind of tie it to everyone was saying pay the man. I'm on that train. His value to the team. Without him, this team is, even with him on this team, you could argue they need some firepower. I mean, we did all summer that, we did that for 4 summers, like, I don't think that shouldn't be a surprise. We won't go into any of that because we've done it to kind of to death. So it's really just I see it as the value to the team. Without him, they're in real trouble.
Yeah.
You give him a $2 million raise. That's nothing, especially when you consider that the salary cap's going to go up $10 million in 2 seasons or 3 seasons. It's going to be such a low percentage of the cap that it won't matter.
And to piggyback on that too, and we touched on this a little bit in our short yesterday. Um, there's always a reason every summer that we talk about why the Islanders didn't get some guy. The reasons are now accumulating for why a superstar would want to sign on Long Island, right? This summer was the summer where, oh, well, they weren't that good a team last season. Are they going to be good next season? The summer before was UBS Arena isn't ready. Do I want to play in a shack like Nassau Coliseum, right? I know it's early to look forward to next summer, but everything that Matthew Barzell said about the Islanders organization, about Long Island, is a net positive for the organization as a whole. Him signing a long-term contract and saying, "I wanna be here long term," is a net positive long term. That all of that is going to attract a free agent to say, "Hmm, chance to play with Mathew Barzal for the next 8 years? Hmm, brand new state-of-the-art arena? Hmm, Mathew Barzal loves it there," and there's now, video evidence of him playing golf and having a great time, and, he even talked about how you want to go out, you can go out. Like there's just so much, in my opinion, now going for the Islanders in that aspect to now hopefully, moving forward, attract free agents. They'll have to do well this season. I think that they will. The narrative has changed again in a positive way. It has
Yeah, and
gotten
there's
better.
a couple of things there that you said. I think, um, Barzell being a younger player, this isn't a veteran in maybe their late 20s, signing with the franchise, or somebody that was, you know, kind of just been there, just not at superstar status. Barzell is at superstar status relatively. He's getting there. I think maybe people know about him more than we realize. He definitely gets the short end sometimes. He's not at that caliber kind of with the media. Um, but, his production can really help that. The success of the team can really help that, and the Islanders team game certainly doesn't help, his individual thing, but he doesn't really care. He does seem to live. You're absolutely right in what he said with 32 Thoughts. He's golfing with the boys. He's really living it up, and he's a younger player, and that could attract somebody that's younger, their first years of UFA, or someone that they trade for that's an RFA to sign an extension at 22, 23, 24 years old. I think that it definitely helps the franchise. And now there's really nothing to discuss outside of the play this season, right? I think you said it right. There's obviously problems with there was arena stuff. It was first it was Barclays, then it was the Coliseum, then it's UBS isn't ready yet, then it's they don't have goaltending, and then it's everything's kind of in place, and maybe save for Barry Trotz being something of a draw to play on Long Island with the Islanders. Um, Lambert is going to have a lot to do with the success of this team this season. But now there's really nothing to talk about after Barzell signs, right? The media doesn't have anything. The fans don't have anything. We can kind of just go into this season and truly judge it on the play on the ice and nothing else. There's no narrative other than they're the underdog, and that's perfectly fine with this team. I think a lot of people are fine with that on the Islander side of it. Certainly, it makes for very good T-shirts from Yes Men Outfitters. Very clever, different things. At the very least, we get some good T-shirts out of it. Um, but I think that finally we can kick that narrative. It's gone. That the mostly the it wasn't really as much of a comparable as people wanted it to be because they just want to shit on Tavares, which is fair. It's been long enough now. Now that Barzell is signed, that can also be put to bed. So there really isn't anything hanging over this team other than last season's performance. And they can right that ship themselves. That's completely up to the players on the ice, the coaching and the management to kind of move this team forward. So I think they're overall the franchise is in a much better place now. And now the rubber meets the road. And maybe this is the hardest part. Maybe this is actually what, judging them actually on their actions is going to be really difficult. I think it turns a lot of scrutiny to that. There's nothing else to talk about. Every night, all eyes are going to be on the product and the ice.
Yeah, and I think to wrap this segment up, I just want to end with talking about Lou for a second. Say what you will about his summer, and he didn't come through. And look, all justified. I do understand that. However, look at his history in retaining his players. Right, Ryan Pulock, he got done a year early. His 8-year contract kicks in this season. Matthew Barzali now gets done a year early. His 8-year contract kicks in next season. Who's up for a contract next summer? Ilya Sorokin. I would not be worried about that based on the history, right? Lamorello has a way and a will to retain his players, his superstars. He did the same thing for Adam Pellick. He by doing that, I think makes his job easier going into the summer because now he can pitch, look at all these pieces that we have in place long term that you're going to want to play with and play around. I understand the hesitation to believe in Lamoriello's ability to reel in a big fish or make a splash, but he made his job easier by locking up all of these really great contracts long term.
I,
You look at Paul Mary has 2 or 3 seasons left at a number that isn't ideal. Pajot, um, Josh Bailey has 2 seasons left, including this one. Like I understand all those other ones that you might not love, which Josh Bailey wasn't even the signing or a signing by Lou Lamoriello, but he's keeping the core pieces that are necessary in place for the team to continue to compete. Um, and he's also proving that you don't have to worry when Ilya Sorokin his contract is up after the season.
I
You
do like
don't.
the Sorokin point. I think that's very fair. I also want to, but before we completely wrap this up, and just because we've kind of touched on this before, in everyone's signed through this season. A lot of players are signed through next season, say for an RFA status Oliver Wahlstrom, Zach Parise, Kiefer Bellows, who we'll talk about a little bit later, um, Scott Mayfield, and um, Semyon Varlamov. So there's a certain amount of money coming off the books next season, and players that you don't necessarily need to bring back if you don't want to, if Lamoriello chooses. Mayfield has a replacement in Grant Hutton if they choose. They don't need to replace Mayfield. I could see them definitely bringing him back. But without going into all of that, what does it mean to you, this Barzal contract, to the future of the team as far as the contract situation? You touched on a little bit about, like, obviously bringing Sorokin back, but it's the preseason. We didn't even get through this preseason yet. Forget about the regular season or potential playoffs or whatever is going to happen over the next 10 months, or however long that takes. It feels like the season's forever. All of a sudden it's August again, and we're prepping for the next season. But what does it mean for the dollars and cents of it all over the next few years?
Yeah. So we touched on yesterday in our short also how the cap is going to be going up to however much in, I think it's 24, 25. But it's going to gradually increase until then. In the negotiations of this contract, Matthew Barzal and his camp knew that and still went with a number that was lower than most anticipated. You look at, Ryan Pollock's contract at the time, whatever the salary cap was then, he got a fair deal. Adam Pellick got a steal of a deal, right? So I think moving forward, you could just be comfortable with, look, when Lamoriello first started as the Islanders GM, he overpaid guys like Anders Lee to stay. He overpaid Leo Komarov to come in. He overpaid probably even Matt Martin to come back, right? There were overpayments just because he had to solidify groundwork for the organization to move forward. I think he's away from that now. I think he did his step one in bringing guys in to make them a good team. Step two it was moving forward when he has to sign a contract and he has to make sure that the team is in a good financial situation moving forward. They will be. Pellick's deal at 5.75 is a steal. Pollock at 6.15 is a steal. He got Dobson to sign a bridge for 3x4. Alexander Romanov for 3x2.5. I think they'll both outplay those contracts. Like I understand the hesitation to like a JG Pajot contract or an Anders Lee contract, even though he's still playing pretty well to that $7 million AAV. I think moving forward, oh, the cap's going up to $92 million. Doesn't matter to me. This is the number that I think is fair for you. Take it or leave it. And with how well these players are treated in the organization and how highly they speak to it, it sounds like players are going to take discounts and they're going to be in a good financial situation once these contracts that that we don't really love are played out. Nasserman Hockey is brought to you by DraftKings. Hey hockey fans, it's finally time to hit the ice again, and thanks to DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NHL, you're in for the season of a lifetime. New customers can bet $5 on any team and get $200 in free bets if they win. If you're an Islanders fan, you're excited that Mathew Barzal just signed a long-term extension. With a new contract in hand, why not bet on him to maybe be the MVP of the upcoming 2022-23 season? If that wasn't enough excitement, you can turn small bets into bigger payouts with same-game parlays. Combine multiple bets like which team will win, how many goals will be scored, and more for your shot at an even bigger payout. DraftKings is safe, secure, and reliable. You can deposit and withdraw your cash whenever you'd like. So download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now, use promo code THPN, bet $5 on any NHL team to win their game, and get $200 in free bets if they do. That's code THPN at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NHL. Minimum age and eligibility restrictions apply. See show notes for details.
Now, we know it's the preseason, and there's a lot you can take from it. But there's not a lot you can take from it. I think we see that narrative quite often. That, the team's losing or this or not always how the team is as a whole is doing. But this is where coaches and management do take a lot of information from individual players, not necessarily the play of the team as a whole, which is difficult for the Islanders because the success of individual players and the team kind of go hand in hand at times. Everyone's kind of going at the same pace if they're playing really well. So it's been difficult to judge so far the team aspect so far this preseason. But there are bits we can learn about individual players. You've been lucky enough to see the Islanders at least once, maybe twice. You're covering the Devils, which is super cool. Congrats on that. I don't think we've had a show where we've been able to say that. So super cool that you're able to do that. You're in the press box, albeit with another team in the Metro Division, but happy to see you kind of get in the press box there. Seeing them in person is very different than watching highlights because not every game's on TV.
Right.
What have you seen in person that you've liked, whether it's from the team or individual players?
So, interestingly enough, the first thing that I noticed was, and I'm sitting next to Ryan Novozinski of NewJersey.com often, and we get to chatting about because he knows I used to cover the Islanders, or not used to, but covered them more often than I did now. And he says to me, he's like, "Man, this game is really slow." And I was like, "Yeah, welcome to New York Islanders hockey here, bud." But that was when it was just 50% of the team, right, in the lineup. Atu played that game. William DeFore played that game, and I did heavily focus on those two. And I have to say, there's question as to whether yes, they had fantastic seasons last season, and they've made themselves legitimate NHL prospects. Will that translate to the NHL level? And I have to say, they both look like players, right?
I do want to pause on that really quickly because Lamorella was very quick to say, even before any of the preseason games, I believe, that
Yes,
both players will be in Bridgeport.
which
What did you
is
make of that?
so. Look, I don't necessarily disagree that they need to go to Bridgeport, right? They're both about to play their first full season in North America professional level. So I do think that they need that time to adjust to the pace, right? Training camp isn't enough. A couple preseason games isn't enough unless they're showing like they're better than most of the guys on the ice. But I don't think they've gotten there yet. I think for their age and I think for where they've been so far, they look great. But I do think that they still need a little bit of fine tuning, right? Aturatu has incredible hockey IQ. He looks excellent out there, and not just in the offensive zone, in all three zones. He can play defense well. He can carry the puck through the neutral zone pretty well, and he can, set plays up in the offensive zone and put himself in a position to score. William DeFore, when I tell you that I looked, I looked at him and I was like, wait, that's a big man. Like standing next to Ross Johnston and looking similar. Whoa, so and he's got a really good shot. One of his knocks has been his skating. I thought he looked fine. Like he looked like he can keep pace. It doesn't look clunky or anything like that. Like he has really good stride. So I wouldn't be concerned with his skating moving forward. I think he has figured out how to, one, keep pace, but two, also put himself in a position where he's not out of position. So he looks really good. Aturatu looks really good. Those two, in my opinion, let them go to Bridgeport for a little bit, even if it's for half a season. Thrive there, gain some confidence, right? Because we saw 1 point from between the two of them. William DeFore had an excellent assist on Nikita Sashnikov's goal, which I saw live. Um, Excellent goal. But, and we have no choice but to believe William DeFore when he says that was calculated. I meant to pass him that puck, right? A lot of people were saying, "Oh, he was just trying to clear the puck." No, he read the play, he read the situation,
You
passing the puck.
usually see these players right before they pass or right before they even get to the puck. They're looking up ice. They're
Yeah,
looking at where they wanna put that puck beforehand, and that's the skill, that's the hockey IQ that it's really hard to do that. A lot of players I mean, look, I'm absolutely nothing special, I never was, but that's not a skill that I had. It was hard to do it consistently because you're worried about what's happening right around you. Am I gonna get hit? Where's my escape? Who are the players in my immediate area that I can get the puck to then make that transition out of our own zone or whatever the case is? That's pretty good, and to see that play, it was tape to tape too, so I do believe him that he it was calculated, but I think that
well,
shows some of his poise, right?
and right, and one of the things that you just said, one of the major factors in being able to keep your head up at the NHL level is something you can't teach in I'm a big guy. If somebody does try to hit me, it doesn't matter. It's like a fly hitting the wall. Right? And that's something that William DeFore has for himself is size, which you can't teach, but he knows, right? If someone's gonna take a run at me, it's a pretty good chance I'm gonna stay on my feet. Pretty good chance I'm just gonna eat that hit. So I'm not worried about, who's around me trying to line me up. I'm worried about Nikita Sashnikov coming off the bench, having a clear path to the net. And you know what? Let me put the puck on his tape. And he did, right? So I think that William DeFore, and it's very interesting too. I read Kevin Kurz's article on him and his mom, and I think we spoke about this a little bit. All the off ice things that happened for him leading up to his draft year and everything that absolutely takes stock in a player like him, um, or in any player for that matter, right? Off ice factors definitely contribute to on ice production. I think the Islanders got a really good player really late. I think the Islanders have a really good player pretty late in Aturatu as well. Off ice
It's about
factors there
time.
as well. About time.
Yeah, Detroit, Tampa, all these teams have been doing that for
Yeah.
a really long time, and to find the diamond in the rough, I think
Yeah.
is really, really not a diamond in the rough, but just because second round's not ridiculous. Dufour was later, 4th round, 5th round.
Fifth.
Um, so I think it's important for the franchise to have some of that, and it really buys them a little bit of time because outside of that larger core of the team, right, which you would consider a Brock Nelson and an Anders Lee, the other core of the team is Barzal, Wallstrom, Bavillier, Dobson, Romanov, Sorokin.
Yeah.
Um, that's a fairly young core. That's a mid-20s and younger core of a team, and to
Right.
be able to add them in maybe a year or two when they're ready is gonna pay dividends. You're adding veterans around them a little bit differently than with the Islanders that when Lamoriello was coming in, they needed to grow. They needed that opportunity and have that veteran foresight of they've been there, even if they didn't make it all the way to a Stanley Cup. Palmieri lost in the Eastern Conference Final um, with the Devils. I think they made it another time. They still lost. I think maybe that was to LA, but even before, you had a lot of these players around them. You can look for different players in the future. You don't need to kind of overpay, as you said earlier, those veterans to kind of come in or overpay the ones you have on your team.
Right.
Most of that core is locked up. So I like, getting back to these two, it just in a year or two, um, it'll really pay dividends.
Right. And so now the question becomes for me, DeFore you can slide in easily because you look at a guy like Bailey whose contract's up soon. You look at a guy like Cal Clutterbuck who didn't dress yesterday. And you hope that the injury concerns aren't still lingering for him, but you wonder if that 2-year contract that he signed at the trade deadline maybe wasn't the best just because of the fact that maybe he's not going to be able to run it back the way you thought he was going to. So
And I
we'll
said
see
that.
with that.
I said
But
that at the time,
you're right.
I wasn't sure because he's had these multiple different issues. It wasn't like it was one thing. He's had multiple injuries. I will say this though, at under $2 million, he's at 1.75. I don't think people were saying bury the contract. I don't quite understand where he's not going to get sent to Bridgeport. I don't know if that's what they meant, but if he's truly injured, he'll go on IR or LTIR, and then that's it. And if it's for this season and next season, it's really not a huge deal for the team. It's a low enough number that even if it is an issue one way or another, um, he's been with the team long enough. They owe him a little bit of something, and it's not like it's a $4 million number where you're like, or even like a Josh Bailey number, that $5 million number. You're like, you got to be kidding me. We don't owe you anything that's too high. Like whatever that subsection of fans is.
Right,
So with
and the thing
Clutterbuck, if
there
he can't play, I don't know who replaced him on the fourth line. Frankly,
well, and the thing too is with Clutterbuck's contract, he makes the same thing in the minors as he does in the NHL. So burying his contract does 0. But one of the things that I'm saying regarding DeFore being able to slide in, look, he took reps with Cizikas, he took reps with Matt Martin. Is he an ideal fourth liner? No, but is he a big enough body to, you know, lay the body on other players? Yes. And if it's just his first season, look, we're not saying need a rider the shit out of this guy,
I
but what
was
we're
just gonna
saying is,
say is that I fans they were in the comments as soon as you started
yeah,
saying that.
I'm not saying Nino Niederreiter the shit out of this guy, but give him a little bit of time to play in some NHL games. Look, the fourth line isn't your prototypical fourth line. They're gonna play significant minutes, at least 12 to 13 minutes, which is pretty good for a rookie. Then let him continue to elevate. My biggest question is with Aturatu because I don't know if you saw Lamorello's comments. I'm sure you did, but he was asked, "Can Aturatu play on the wing?" And he said he's a center. What does that mean now? We know Matthew Barzal's not going anywhere for 9 years. Brock Nelson has 3 years left on his contract. JG Pajot has 4, and Casey Zizekas has 4, 5, 5.
Casey Zizekas.
Casey
Yes.
Zizekas has 5.
Now, I think there's some wiggle room here. You get somebody, can Zizekas play the wing in the future, and Pajot move down? I mean, we're speculating here, and you're kind of pushing things a little bit. We're pushing things a little far here, but
Well,
that
are we
those
pushing things far
bottoms.
though? Because he's so close. How far are we really pushing it?
Well, you got to think if there isn't a Clutterbuck, and Martin might not hold up much longer either, and he's only got 2 years left. So that fourth
True.
line may just look a little bit different in the future. That may be JG Pajot centering that line with a Zizekas on the wing, and then you're filling it with whomever. I don't know what that transition is at this point for Zizekas to play the wing. Maybe it's different. I'm not entirely sure, but you can figure that out. I think in your bottom six, you make that room for a star player behind Barzell, Nelson, Ratu, um, and then whoever, Pajot, or Cizikas. Um, I don't think that's crazy. One way, I think they can make that work.
No, I think you're right. I just think that the comments were interesting. Can he play on the wing? He's a center.
I think that
So
might also mean that it takes longer than any of us are going to like to develop at the pro level as a center.
maybe
Is he 20? Is he even 20 yet?
he is he even 20 yet? I think he's still 19.
Okay,
Um,
so
yeah, he's 19.
and he turns 20 in November. I think he's going to be further away. If he is going to be a center, by the time he's actually coming onto the team, Peugeot may no longer be on the team. It might not. It may be a moot point by the time he's truly ready to take on. Let's call it a middle six role, just because of his talent, and not a bottom six
You think
role.
it takes more than 4 years?
Okay, maybe not, and that's where you can kind of play with things. If someone gets, Peugeot has a modified no trade. Again, this is speculating. We're getting a little
Yeah,
ahead
of
of ourselves,
course, of course.
but I think there's room to make all this work. Maybe
You're
Cizikas
probably
isn't
right.
an everyday player at that point. Um, and maybe he's, by then he's in 2 seasons he's 33, 34 years old. Maybe he's not an everyday NHLer anymore. Um, I It's also going to be a different GM. It also has everything to do with the rest of that roster at that point when Ratu's coming in. Um, but he may take 2 pro seasons in Bridgeport before he comes up, which means Peugeot would have 1 year left or
I
three.
want to touch on what you just said real quick about a new GM. I was listening to Craig Button the other day talk about Chris Lamorello, and he said, "Look, maybe Islander fans aren't super excited at the name, but he's like, what I will say is, year after year, people are always asking me who should be nominated for a possible position as a GM for the next team, and he always says Chris Lamorello first, and he says, I promise you this, Chris Lamorello is a different person than his father." Just thought those comments were interesting. Um, Wanted to touch on that real quick, and then we can move on.
Yeah, I think that's interesting considering they may approach that the franchise as a whole. Forget about Lou himself. The franchise may do with that information and that situation the same they did with Lane Lambert, who would have gotten a head coaching job somewhere, whether it was during, before the season started or after the season. So they may need to do the same thing with Chris Lamorello to say he may be asking, telling his dad, "Look, I want a shot. So if it's not here, that's fine. Do your thing. Respect this franchise. I am going to go do this." So push come to shove, he may get a GM job the same way Lane Lambert was going to get a head coaching job, and it has everything to do with the timeline. So they may be doing that in 2 years from now. They may be happening after this season. We really don't know. And I honestly don't expect us to know. It's not like Lamorello is gonna, put a stopwatch on, or countdown clock rather, on his time with the franchise. But yeah, I mean, going back to Ratu, it may just be that he takes a little bit longer than Dufour. My guess is that we see Dufour first because he's a winger and there's going to be room on the wing. On top of that, centers take longer to develop. He's only going to be 20 years old. Let's see where things are at in the
Yeah, I think
bottom six moving forward, specifically on that third line. And frankly, that may be by the time Ratu comes in, Nelson's getting bumped down and he's no longer the second line center. You got to remember, he's 30 years old now. So
right.
he may, depending on the situation and who the coach is and how, so you may be looking at a middle six centers as Ratu, Nelson, one way or another. It may start Nelson, Ratu first, and then it may flip. So
I
I
think
think
that's
it's
all.
worth waiting to see how it
Yeah,
shakes out. But I do
I think
think he's 2 seasons away.
I think that's all fair to say. I have him ready a little sooner than that.
I'm not saying he
But
won't
you
be ready sooner
no,
than
no, I
that,
know.
but it's
I'm saying
as Lamoriello as the GM, Lou Lamoriello as as the Islanders GM, the New York Islanders GM. Man, they really made that confusing. Both the same GM, both the same team name at this point. Um, Hopefully, we
say
know
the
we're
Varsity Islanders.
the varsity. Yeah, geez. New York is just too long. We can't say that anymore. Varsity Islanders and the JV Islanders. Um, I think it's if either one of the Lamorellos. I mean, I think the philosophy is probably not that too far off. But if Lou is the GM, he is going to let Aturatu marinate a little bit longer. And centers typically do that anyway. Again, longer than I think we're comfortable with as a franchise, considering what we think he can do. But it really is going to come down to opportunity.
No, yeah,
Where's the
I
franchise? What's his development like? If he blows up this season, they're not going to hesitate. They're going to figure out a way to do it and get him on the roster for the 23-24 season. They are not going to wait longer than that. It really has everything to do with where the team's at the end of the season and where Rato is at the end of the season.
yeah, I think that's all very fair. And just a couple other points that I wanted to touch on with things of concern that I saw for the Islanders live were threefold. One, the pace, and again, take this with a grain of salt because it was still preseason, still 50% of the roster that was in the lineup. So there are things to still work on. But the pace to me was definitely one. Like I said, Ryan turned to me and was like, "This is super slow," and I said, "Welcome to Islander hockey." Two, 5-on-5 goal scoring. Again, we'll see how that goes. 50% of the roster, but low scoring affair for the Islanders. One goal from Nikita Sashnikov, who really, in my mind, was the outlier for the team in that game because he was what everybody else wasn't. Quick, he scored on a really nice shot, right? He did everything everybody else in the Islanders didn't. So, and I think he's making a case for himself to make the team. He looks pretty good out there. And third, special teams, which by that point, when I saw them, they hadn't worked on. So I think they have worked on it since, and they've gotten a little bit better. I think they scored the other night, but that is also something that the Islanders are going to have to make sure improves. It was good last. I think it was it was good last season, right? It wasn't as bad as it has been, but it definitely needs to improve. And that all starts with, Barzal and Noah Dobson. You can throw Oliver Wallstrom's name in that mix, right? Is he going to play up to the potential that we know he has and force his way onto that unit? Um, and score some goals because that's ultimately his, that's what he was drafted to do. So
Yeah, I think that's right. The little that I've been able to watch of the preseason so far, um, it definitely seems a little slow. I hope that, as we said multiple times, even today, the transition game really is going to play a big role in that, in getting that
yeah,
puck up the ice. I think we'll know more by the end of this week. Um, Islanders and Flyers played on on Tuesday, or earlier this week. Islanders win 4-3, I believe, in overtime. Um, the roster will be, as we're recording this, Kevin Kurz tweeted earlier this morning that expect some cuts today, or later this morning. So we're trying to keep an eye on that in case there's anything breaking. I haven't seen anything quite yet. So we're keeping an eye on that as we record. I'm not seeing anything breaking, and as soon as we stop recording and I start editing, for sure it's going to pop up. But I think what we'll know more about is in-game reps with Dobson, Romanov, a full defensive core that is expected to include Robin Salo at this point. It's not looking like it's going to be somebody else, and we'll talk about the repercussions of that. And we have a couple things that I want to touch on before we get to that. Um, but I really wanted to see the full roster, right? And you really only get a game, maybe two, with the full roster, save maybe a player or two on a maintenance day. So from there, you're looking at line combinations. But even before I care about who is on what line in the last two preseason games, I kind of wanted to see the overall pace improve. You want to see the passes being crisp. You want to see everyone kind of on their game. You want to see more typical mistakes and lapses and different things that are typical for early in the season. Um, Up until this point, it's kind of fair. It just kind of is what it is. Goalies have some rust. They have to build some confidence. I think they've done that in back-to-back wins against the Philadelphia Flyers, although it's the Flyers, so take that with what you will. But you still got to build confidence in some way, and there have been positive. There are players that are building um, that confidence as they go, but I do want to see them kind of put that together. Um, Speaking of players like Wallstrom that do need to find a way to step up, Kiefer Bellows, is he a lock? Now I wrote about this. I know what my opinion is, but I'm curious on what your opinion is. Is he a lock for the final roster and not the opening night? Um, Top 12. Is he just a lock for the NHL this season?
I don't know. And the reason why I say that is, I see for him, he's doing a couple of things, right? He's reinventing himself a little bit, kind of like Michael Dalcol did. He had recorded the most hits in last night's game. I think he had 5 or 6. Um, so he's establishing himself as a physical presence out there. And you wonder if that's going to be enough, right? He hasn't scored yet. Something that he says he wants to do, something he was drafted to do. So you're looking for, and the Islanders are looking for overall more goals, and that's something that they need from him. However, we touched on this a little bit a few minutes ago. Nikita Sashnikov looks excellent. He is scoring. He is fast. He is making a bigger impact than a guy like Kiefer Bellows is. So the only difference there, if I'm not mistaken, is the contract, right? Bellows is on a one-way contract, whereas Sashnikov isn't. So there is a case to be made about if he is a lock for the roster, it's only because of the contract situation. However, the Islanders might have protected themselves a little bit from Bellows being claimed off of waivers with a $1.5 million cap hit. So maybe he
I
could
think
go
that's
through
right.
waivers.
Yeah, I think that's where I saw it, that was his saving grace, is that he had 2 things working for him. The waiver situation and the team obviously wanting to keep him around even for another year and paying him what they did. Um, so, the waiver situation and the fact that he has NHL experience, recent NHL experience, even if it's not been, 25 points in 67 games over the last few seasons, limited playing time, you can take that with a bit of a grain of salt, but even given a larger opportunity, has proven he's certainly not a first line player. Um, I don't think he's really proven himself as a second line player. And when given more of a consistent chance on a third line against different competition, albeit a different style on the Islanders on that third line, and being slightly more talented fourth line, that identity line, but they're still going in there with a little bit more brute force and not with the talent. Although nothing taking away from what Peugeot and Palmieri did last season. Um, it's he just really hasn't shown that. Being you know third of a game point, point per game player isn't really anything to kind of sneeze at. So you mentioned Sashnikov. Um, Anyone else kind of knocking at the door? I've seen Holmstrom's name thrown around as somebody that um, could be a little bit of a threat. And both of those players, Sashnikov and Holmstrom, Lambert has said really good things. And if I'm not mistaken, Lambert even said that Holmstrom was one of the team's best players in one of the preseason games. And that can't be good for Bellows. The comments Lambert made about Bellows, and I didn't put it in my article because I was kind of focusing on what was working against Bellows and not necessarily what Bellows was doing in this preseason. Or maybe I should have added that, but I'll do it here. Um, Lambert was like, he's okay. It's something along those lines, paraphrasing. And that's not good for Bellows. That's not, you don't want to hear Holmes. This is really good. I like what Sashnikov's bringing. Fans may not know Sashnikov, but the players do. Matt Martin played with him in Toronto. He had a lot of good things to say. I believe we both put a very similar quote in recent articles about that. So it's interesting. Um, and this is where we can bring Robin Salo into the mix. Right now, there's one roster spot open. Salo is not yet on the official NHL roster, and when he's called up, that's when the decision needs to be made, and that's when those final cuts become really, really important. Because if Bellows doesn't make the roster, and Holmstrom or Sashnikov, it cannot be. There's like one of three, right? They're all playing for that last spot. It seems Ross Johnson is not in trouble. Somehow he's gonna stay on the roster. I don't understand it. If Clutterbuck's out, I don't like Johnson and Martin on the same line with Zizekas. I think it's much too slow. Clutterbuck at least had a little bit of speed, and he's a penalty killer. I don't really know what the team's solution is on that front, frankly. So it'll be interesting. That's where they're in a little bit of a bind this season. Some of those players that they kind of depended on for a long time to fill specific roles, I especially on special teams, I just don't know if they're there at this point. Um, but that's where a decision's going to be made. Bellows is going to get waived, and one of those players is going to make it. And I wouldn't be disappointed if it was Holmstrom. He had his best year last year. It still wasn't. anything crazy, but it was his 3rd pro season. Sashnikov is a little bit of a honey badger. He's gonna get in there. I tried to watch, some videos, but just kind of going off of other teammates, Martin's comments and some other teammates' comments about him. It seems like he could fit the mold for that 3rd line. If Parise, and we're gonna talk about the lineup in a second, but so it's kind of a mess to discuss who's gonna be where and where they can fill in because we really don't know. Um, but he could be a 3rd line player to kind of start, and he's 28, so um he kind of is what he is. That was a hell of a shot after that pass from Dufour. He really found some open space. The Islanders could really use some bottom six scoring like that, especially if a player's out of the lineup, to be able to replace them with somebody that's going to provide the goal scoring, at least a support for the goal scoring um, without them in the lineup. That's really important, right? If he can gel with whoever the 3rd line center is and whatever's happening around him, I think that's really important. I don't think Bellows is a lock, frankly. That's my bottom line. I thought Lambert's comments about all 3 of those players spoke volumes. So I'm not surprised. I was surprised that he was brought back at all, and because I said that, even though I'll say this, I'll eat crow on it. Sonny Milano is not a lock to make Calgary. So the Islanders may have, damned if they did, damned if they didn't with Milano and Bellows. Regardless, they may have found an internal candidate, which, you know what? Holmstrom, and you know this better than me, Holmstrom kind of got buried by Ratu, Dufour, and maybe even some other, and Robin Salo, frankly, as far as the prospects are concerned. So it's a good sign that somebody like that comes in. Again, that pushes that longer term window and that core of the team if Holmstrom can make a difference. And maybe he always was, but he just got buried in the conversation a little bit. So I think it's really good on a lot of levels. If Bellows just isn't it, that's fine. Maybe they just continue to keep him around one way or another, and he's a bottom six guy in the future. But you know, Dalcol got cut. Where was he? Ottawa. He got cut um, from his PTO. So that seemed like the right move, and he never really stuck with the Islanders either. And Bellows seems to be in the right place, although I think he has a little more offensive upside, though he has not done it consistently. He had that one game with 2 goals against the Devils. He just really hasn't been able to do that consistently.
Yeah, I think that's all fair. You know, starting with Holmstrom and talking to him, he he's developed into a player who is not only finding the score sheet like he did in Bridgeport, but he's reliable in the defensive zone too, and that's one of the big things about Kiefer Bellows is, well, if you're not contributing on the score sheet, can you at least defend well? And I think Holmstrom has surpassed him in that aspect. And you're right. The comments from Lane Lambert regarding both Bellows and Holmstrom are far different. And one of the things I said about Holmstrom in comparison to Dufour and Ratu was he might not have the ceiling those guys have, but he's more prepared to play now. So that's why he could be one of the first or the first prospect called up to the NHL level. So we'll see, what comes of Holmstrom, but he's in like it looks like the final stretch of cuts with Dufour, with um Ratu and uh it's possible he forces his way onto the roster. Is his makeup, is his tool belt the same as Kiefer Bellows, where he's a goal scorer? No, he's more, and in the comparison I've been told is uh, similar to Josh Bailey, whether you love or hate that sentence, but um, you're excited at the fact that there's another player in the system who took a little bit longer to get there, but he's still just what 20, 21. He's 21. Got so much time still under his belt to become a player, and he's already getting there. So nothing but net positives for Simon Holmstrom and his future as an Islander. I think that you're absolutely right. He could be above Kiefer Bellows on the depth chart at this point. So, in my opinion, and this is something that I had said a couple weeks ago, I think he could be the first guy you see called up. I know there's The possibility of William Defoe getting called up to play on the wing, but I think Simone Holmstrom gets that call first. Um, and everything you said about the comments comparison between Holmstrom and Bellows with Lane Lambert, you're absolutely right. Lambert has praised Holmstrom as a player, and with Bellows, yeah, he's okay. And that was really the crux of it. Nothing more, nothing less. Um, Robin Salo, I think it's his. I think it's his spot. He's been playing with Mayfield the whole time. He hasn't moved from that left defense position on the third pair. And it's not just like, oh, it's his spot because he's the best choice, or he's the best available. He is the I should have rephrased that. He's not just the best available, he's the best choice. He's proven that right now in the preseason. He's skating really well, he's defending pretty well. He's not afraid to walk the blue line, he's got good skill. He can handle the puck well, he can skate it in transition. He's finding the score sheet. He's making the right plays, right? He's he's going to make the blue line faster. And that was one of the goals for this offseason is to make the blue line faster, and they have. Um, if Grant Hutton was giving him a run for his money, that would be something else, but he's not. So Sebastian Aho is not somebody we've even mentioned yet, but he has been awful, like awful. I don't know what they're going to do with him. I wonder if he's a candidate to hit the waiver wire, and I wouldn't put it past them. I think they should do that because
And they
I
need a
just
seventh defenseman one way or another, whether that's
which I think
Tchaikovsky or Aho. Like somebody's
yeah,
going to be on waivers.
it could be
Is
Hutton.
well, Hutton again. That's where it's tough because he's a righty. So
Right, but
he's
at that point, you're either your seventh guy is either a righty or a lefty. It's whoever's gonna win that spot.
it. That's true, and maybe that's what they do. I think my the way that I've thought about it is that I didn't expect Salo to play every game. So my thought was that it was going to be a lefty. And purely because he was young and he was gonna go through that, and the coaches were gonna have him sit a game here and there just to kinda, like, reset. Similar to, like, maybe not to the same extent as Wallstrom and some of the other players with Trotz, but going through this kind of longer NHL season and Robin Salo's first go at it, I really didn't expect him to play every single game. But you may be right. It may just be Hutton is the reliable veteran, seventh defenseman. If he needs to play, they'll figure it out. Um, and Salo's just, he's obviously the guy. He's the sixth defenseman with Mayfield and kind of go from there. That may be right if Aho simply isn't cutting it. Again, another curious, like, I don't understand, kind of like Bellows, but they've done this for a long time. It just they seem to just know their guys, which is just a different problem. Like sometimes it works and a lot of times it just doesn't. The veterans that have been around and proven themselves, Lee, Nelson, whatever. Yeah, I mean, pay those guys. Give them like who cares? It's these smaller little ones that like seems to handcuff them when it's like the difference is like a million or $2 million because after they waived Panic, again another curious like why is this guy here? Like what is really happening? Didn't even buy him out. You want him in the AHL that bad? I mean, no one claimed
Might
him,
be
so like,
cheaper.
well, yeah, whatever. Um, with before Salo's $800,000, the Islanders would have 2.5 million. So if Bellows isn't around, that's like three. It's back up to 3.5 ish or something like that. Like that's enough for like a player. Like that's like a real, especially if Clutterbuck isn't going to start the season, which they didn't know that. But then you add another almost $2 million. Like that's a player's worth of money there, especially to get the full worth of LTIR. You have to be up to the cap. So like I'm very confused on a number of these deals and just like you really believed in them that much? And you really believed in Bell just to have around? And then you brought in Sashnikov anyway? You had Holmstrom there? Give someone else a shot. Or like, hey, Bellows, like you're just not a full-time NHLer, like whatever. You're not even in the press box. Like it's just we'd rather have you playing games. and develop a little bit more instead of just sitting around. Like it's so confusing. But let's change gears and then because we do want to wrap up kind of soon. We're hitting the hour mark here. Um, our buddy Joe Pantorno put out his projected lines. I don't know if you saw that yet.
No, I did not. Want to
So
read them off to me?
I'll read them off to you. So I'm not putting any stock into like what he called the first line, whatever. So we'll just call one at a time as he wrote them. Line one, Lee Nelson Bavilier. That's a line that worked last year. I don't think there's anything surprising. Um, I'll start with what he called the third line. Bailey, Pajot, Wallstrom.
Okay.
Fourth line is what it is. The second line that he wrote was Parise, Barzal, Palmieri. What do you
Yeah.
make of again, I'm not like this isn't putting Joe on blast or anything like that, but I think this is the confusing part, right? I can understand leaving Pavilier where he was and that line had success last season. Fine. I would prefer the kid line as had suggested with Pavilier, Barzell, Wallstrom. Let it ride, let him loose. Understand not doing that. Understand not even thinking that Lambert, who's not going to be that much different than Trotz, uh, would would be willing to do that, especially right at the outset. What do you make of really the second and third line? So the second being with Barzell and the third being with Peugeot.
I'll start with the third line, right? And I'll say Wallstrom's on the third line, where a lot of us said, is that the ideal spot for him? Or does he need to be elevated to succeed? Well, he's had his shot with Barzell in the preseason. Has he shown anything? Uh, Not really. He's not taking advantage of the opportunity being given. He hasn't found the back of the net yet, and maybe I, I'm not too sure, but maybe his defensive deficits are still there. Maybe he's best served with a player like JG Pageau. Um, and flanked by Josh Bailey, there's a passer on that line, right? You have a guy like Pajot who could skate the puck around. You have a distributor in Bailey, and you have a shooter in Wallstrom. So maybe that works, right? It's a slightly different look because Bailey wasn't there previously. He was in the top six. Now he's in the bottom six on that third line with JG Pajot. So we'll see if that works. But in my mind, if Oliver Wallstrom, he the articles were out there. You had this whole summer where he learned how to cook and he's not putting pressure on himself and he's coming in better shape, yada yada. Great. Now you need to produce, and he hasn't so far in the preseason. I don't believe he was on the first power play unit. I'm not sure if he was on the second, but he is at least been given the opportunity to skate with Barzell and nothing. So if that changes in season and he does get an elevated role, maybe it's because he's starting to produce and find his game and get his feet under him. But as of right now, he hasn't shown that. As far as the Barzell line, look, Barzell stated himself, "I love playing with Zach Parise." You knew that as soon as those words came out of his mouth, you knew he was going to play on his left wing. As for Palmieri, I said from the get go, if it wasn't going to be Wallstrom, it should be Palmieri. I don't hate it. I don't hate it because you saw what he did at the end of last season, and not only did he score 14 goals, but I'm pretty sure a total of 6 were called back, and he did that in like 30 something games. 20 goals in 30 something games. So I'm not saying he's going to score 40 friggin' goals this year, but if he's playing with Mathew Barzal, he's surely going to increase his goal totals from 20 to at least 25. And you're not, in my opinion, going to see the first 29 games that you saw of Palmieri last season where he didn't score a goal, right? He scored one in 29. So I think a much more consistent Palmieri playing next to Barzal, I think that's actually a really good duo. You want it to be Wallstrom because he's obviously the future and you're hoping that he takes that step. But if he's not going to do that right now and the team still wants to win, I think Palmieri is your best bet as the right wing.
I
So,
think
and he's a guy who can keep pace with Barzal. He's not as fast, obviously, but he has decent enough foot speed to keep pace. He knows where to put himself on the ice in order to score, and that's all you want.
yeah, I agree, and I think we said this at the beginning of last season. It's Palmieri's spot to lose just as much as Wallstrom's spot to earn. And if Wallstrom isn't earning that spot with production, then it's just not going to be his. I think
Exactly.
it's as easy as that. He needs to kind of prove that he can do it. Um, so both of those players it has everything to do with. If Palmieri is not doing it, then you give Wallstrom a shot. But Wallstrom also has to be playing well, or they'll just leave it alone. There's no reason to switch two bad players. I mean, maybe it's just a little bit of change of scenery, some different line mates. But something that Barzal said last season is you have to leave things alone long enough to gel, right? I think not in those words, but he had said it in the context of people were injured with COVID, in and out, where he couldn't get chemistry with everybody because the line mates were changing all the time. So I think that's where you might see the lines kind of start the season and not change all that much just to see what sticks and what doesn't, even if they
And
start somewhat poorly.
sorry, go ahead.
No, that was it.
So I was gonna say, even I don't know if you saw this more recently. I don't know who wrote it. It actually might have been Michael Russo, who covers the Wild, talking to Zach Parise about his transition from getting bought out by Minnesota and then signing with the Islanders. Obviously, the getting signed by the Islanders was a high for him, but getting bought out by Minnesota hit him hard. He took that very personally. And he said, he was like, look, I feel like my on ice play was definitely affected by, you know, my I don't want to say devastation, but I was disappointed in myself that I didn't play well enough to remain with the Wild. Obviously, I love being here on Long Island and everything. Nothing against the Islanders. I'm just, my play on the ice was a disappointment to myself, and I think that stuck with me for a little while. He still wound up scoring 15 goals, 35 points, which is pretty good for the position he was in. But and I understand he's 38 years old. You're not looking for him to quote unquote develop more, but think there's a possibility he might even be better this season. So I understand not loving Zach Parise, 38 years old, and at the tail end of his career on the first line with Mathew Barzal. However, like I said earlier, Barzal said he loves playing with Parise. Parise showed that he still has the foot speed and he can keep pace and he's still an NHL player. Um, if his he said he's in a much better headspace this season. Um, tough couple of years for everyone over the last couple of years, including last season. It was still far from normal. I think this season with Palmieri and Parise on Barzal's wings, I think you're going to like that product. Right now, it doesn't look like anything special, but I think you're going to like what you see because it's so different than last season. Things are so much different. And whether you want to believe that or not, whether you want to say it's an excuse or not, there's a difference between an excuse and what actually happened. And those are things that actually happened. They have to prove it, they have to show up. And if they don't, that's on them. But there were reasons why things didn't work last season. And I think with all of that out of the way, especially for those two players that are playing with Matthew Barzell, I think that you will like what you see. I think you will like the product.
I think it's a perfect way to end the show. A little bit of positivity as we head into the season. Barzal
Let's
contract
go.
in the books. Yes, let's go indeed. Let's go Islanders and let's go off of this episode. Please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to or watch the show. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube at Nussman Hockey. You can find James' work at the fourth period. You can even get some insight on the Devils now with James over at the fourth period. You can find my work at the Hockey Writers. Make sure you subscribe to Isles Fix. That'll be getting started any week now as the season gets started. Excellent group of kind of writers over there doing daily emails. It'll be really good. But James, bring us home.
Until next time, everyone, let's go Islanders.